Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of The Cheeky Natives. We're recording live at one of our favorite venues, Bridge Books in Maboneng, and we've got a wonderful guest today whose book has been on everybody's lips for the past few months, and I'm sure you guys are excited as I am to have a really interesting conversation, I'm speaking it into being, with the author of Sorry Not Sorry, The Experiences of a Brown Woman in a White South Africa, Haji Mohamed Dawjee. Welcome to the Cheeky Natives.
Thanks, guys.
How are you doing, Haji?
I'm doing well. I was a bit traumatized by the Joburg traffic, but other than that, I'm fine.
Oh, that
Yes, so you're baptism by fire.
Yeah.
So we've seen you've been here like for what, 3-4 days, and
Yes.
you guys have, you and Rebecca, whom you're married to, have been doing book launches. How has that been?
It's been good. I did a Wiser talk at Wits on, I can't even remember what day it is, on Tuesday evening, which was interesting. It was nice to engage. It was a bunch of academics, so it was nice to engage in sort of a different way because they were quite theoretical and they pushed my intellect out a bit. And I just wanted to be like, guys, it's a very simple book, actually. And then last night, of course, at Love Books in Melville, it was my wife's book launch. She's got a new book called Self-Helpless, which is kind of a humorous take on self-help experiences, but it's very much a non-self-help book, which is quite funny. And then tonight I'm here, so...
No, we're excited
Can
to
I just
definitely
say
have you.
that these are bagels, right? It's like, I know Bae's listening, so I'm just putting it out there. It's time to write a book.
To be on the Cheeky Natives.
And be on the Cheeky Natives, right? Because did you hear that? I was at my wife's launch, and today's her launch. Levels. Levels, Father, I've seen what you've done for other children.
So, Haji, obviously the title of your book is Sorry Not Sorry, Experiences of a Brown Woman in White South Africa. For someone who's listening to the podcast and, you know, wanting to make a decision about whether to buy the book or not, like give us like a elevator, what is Sorry Not Sorry about?
So, Sorry Not Sorry is a collection of essays about how I and my experience in South Africa have just become saturated and completely exhausted about apologizing for who I am, the color of my skin, my preferences when it comes to food. Like, you know, spices, for example, because white people hate spices.
Oh,
And yeah, that, you know, that kind of thing, because I think, you know, in a post-democratic, is it post-democratic?
you can say what you want. It's post in Hakkies.
Post-apartheid, rather, South Africa. I think we grow up with our parents sort of teaching us that in order to survive, and indeed in order to be successful, we kind of have to make ourselves small in this very big world where very big things are happening, like politics and race and all of that. But no one ever, and then of course we've got like, you know, marketing campaigns telling us that we're a great rainbow nation. And we're actually not, because the whole rainbow nation ideology serves white people more than it serves people of color, right? And it creates a peaceful space for them to exist in, but no one ever teaches us as young people of color how to have those conversations. And so I guess it's a collection of essays where I'm kind of grappling and also learning how to assert those conversations.
So naturally, we want you to read, you know, give people a taste of what's happening in the book.
Sure.
Would you do the honors?
So for those of you who do have your Bible here, please turn to the chapter on begging to be wise on page 37, and Haji will begin reading from the last paragraph. If you don't have your book here, I hope you have lots of FOMO and you're going to buy your book afterwards.
Okay, so this is from a chapter called Begging to Be White. Sorry, just to preface, so an excerpt of this was published in the Daily Maverick and I think some other publications. And I mean, it's a very honest essay, but it's also quite humorous. And I had white people sending me screen grabs and pictures of their spice straws to prove that they indeed knew what spices were. And I'm just like, guys, you've completely missed the point. But anyway. In her book, Americana, Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie writes about the difference in racial awareness between white people and black people. Race doesn't really exist for you because it has never been a barrier. Black folks don't have that choice. There is so much truth in this. When last did you live a day without thinking about the color of your skin and how you would be treated because of it at any moment? This is not a comment on a lack of pride or ownership of identity. Just because this awareness lingers in the back of our minds does not mean we're not proud of who we are. Now, how many times a day would you think about the color of your skin if you were white? Never. I often wonder what it would feel like to move through the world as a white person. Actually, that's a lie. I know what it would feel like. Easy. It would be so simple. The rules would be my own. The consequences of my actions minimal. My ambitions would be my own as well. They would not be a product of this incessant need to prove myself. I could have as little or as much ambition as I wanted. I would owe the world nothing, yet benefit from the hard work of everyone else. I would carry great pride and no guilt, entitled to a fundamental right. That right would be power, an embedded kind of power, its existence established long before my grand entry into the world, its endurance seemingly eternal. I would be as negligent as I wanted, bathe in my own ignorance, and have little to complain about, but complain nonetheless, just because I could. Now, isn't that a charming little universe?
What a way to start.
For me, begging to be white was probably one of my more favorite chapters in the book, because I was cracking myself the whole way. And the part where you talk about white people and spices,
yes,
that was my favorite. Because I think the idea of, like, you know, going to a restaurant and, you know, you're ordering the steak and you're like, it's going to be juicy, and it just comes out and it just doesn't have the right amount of seasoning, right?
Yes, but also it's like more than that, right? So I've been in the situation before, as has my brother, as has my sister, which were direct points of reference for that statement, where they've had like neighbors or whatever and they're busy cooking and neighbors complain, and they're like, so my brother had this neighbor who lived below him and he lived upstairs, and him and his wife were cooking, like, I don't know, some chicken or something. And she complained, and she was like, if you're going to cook your food, please close your windows because I can't stand the smell. And, you know, the broader opinion on this is literally, she was a German woman, but more than that. So colonialism works this way. You travel the world, you like literally obliterate people and countries, you separate them, you conquer and divide, and then you basically make money of things like spices and trade and fabric and, like, you know, whatever, and textiles. So basically white people, generations long, have gone around the world, stolen spices, exported them, made money off them, capitalized on them, and swapped them for smallpox blankets. You know, that's how they paid for them. And now they're all like offended. They're like, oh, why are you using masala, babes? Like, I'm just like, maybe you should try it.
But it's also a commentary on how people who have privilege seem to believe that the way that they do things should be the benchmark at which things are done. So because she didn't cook with spices, or she just was a salt and pepper kind of person, I guess, she felt that that was the standard at which everybody else should be judged according to, right? So anybody who deviates from that norm is then offensive, right? And then you can come to me and tell me to close my windows of my house when I'm cooking my dinner, because you don't like how it smells in your house.
And also the assumption that, you know, your food, so there's this othering in, like, okay, so you're making your food as if, you know, it isn't food. Like, no, the food that we make is the standard of food. But when you're going to use your masala, please, like, we don't want to smell any of that.
Yes, exactly. And that is like so perpetuated because, okay, for example, my wife and I are really into the show at the moment called My Kitchen Rules.
Yay.
We're obsessed. And there were these two wonderful contestants called Minnie and T, two black girls from KZN, and they were actually like our favorite. And they raised this very good point. So My Kitchen Rules is basically like you host a dinner at your house, and you got to cook like this gourmet 3-course meal. And then your guests who are other contestants eat, but then there are two judges who judge the food. And then the contestants judge the food as well. And they were all judging it according to these Western norms. So basically, Mina and T raised this point to say, you know, it's such bullshit that gourmet food can only be Western food. Like, why does it have to be French cuisine or Italian cuisine? You know, why can't we base our judgment of cuisine food on our Africanness, for example, or even our Indianness or whatever. And yeah, so that's a very good point, and extends beyond that, like norms of beauty, for example.
The most sexiest women are all white.
So why would you, in the book, you continue to, in that essay, which I just loved, you said you'd always want to speak to the owner. You'd always ask to speak to the owner.
The manager,
To
yes.
the manager, yes,
Yes.
the manager. Why would you always want to speak to the manager? Because I mean, Letlhogonolo and I always have this conversation about the difficulties of people of color in complaining. We struggle to complain, right? You'll complain to your friends, like, yeah, I'm never going back there. But you feel some type of way about calling the manager. Oh my God, like it has to be a crisis for the manager to be called. Like, the world needs to have stopped.
Yeah. So I think, this is so important because, again, it comes to like a language thing, right? Because we go through our whole lives, generations, this is like the cellular memory of like not saying anything. Because like previously you get punished, and now we're just dumbstruck by the whole thing. And so we go home and we're like, oh, you know what, I should have told that person, that white person. I should have said, instead of a brain, you have a cash register, and instead of a heart, you have a bottom line. But like, we don't say that, and we go home and we think about it. I mean, it's true, right? And I mean, who has ever seen like the performance of like a white lady in like a store? Like, it's a lot. They're like, oh, I need to see your manager. This is, like not good. And, like, I can't handle the service. And so when I reference that in the book, I go through, and I don't know if this has happened to anyone else, but I, for example, walk into a store, even if it's discount, right? And depending on which aisle I'm in, and I'm referring specifically to like a perfume aisle, for example, where those are high-end goods, I'm hounded by white salespeople, or they'll follow me around the store.
This is truly only in Cape Town, I must say. Like.
No, this has happened to me in Joburg several times. I'm referring to Rosebank now in specific.
Okay.
I've been followed around a store and completely hounded as if like I don't belong there, or as if like my money is not good enough. And then I do this thing where like I overspend.
Yeah.
Right?
So to show that you've got the money, give me that, give me that.
So I'm like, you know what, I don't actually just want the Dolce & Gabbana. I want that, I want the Armani, I want the Versace, and I want, because just because I want to be like, I actually deserve to be here, and I'm going to show you that you are just a salesperson, and I can afford the goods, which is actually wrong and detrimental. Like, we shouldn't have to do that. Like, white people don't have to do that. If white people find themselves in a circumstance where they are hounded by sales assistants or like whatever, they'll complain about it, and then they'll probably get the perfume for free or something.
But you will spend and
Yeah, or you'll
buy
be followed around like the store. I never ever understand that, right? It's like, if I was gonna steal anything at Discount, it wouldn't be cotton wool. Like, I'm so confused. Why are you following me around in the cotton wool aisle, right? And it always happens. I actually did a social experiment the other day. I went to the store. I was wearing my scrubs that have doctor in big bold letters, right? I mean, you're supposed to be the noble profession, Did the security guard not follow me from one end of the store to the other? And I was like, bro, if you collapse, I'm the one person who can help you.
Exactly.
Maybe don't harass me, like maybe as a start. And then you have this conversation with like your white counterparts, and they totally cannot understand what you're talking about, right? And it's just even that replication of those systems, because the security guard who's doing that to you is black, like it's a person of color, and he still has such a high index of suspicion. Like, there was like a tweet the other day about how these boys went in and they robbed a grocery store, but they were really smart. So they had their white friends come with them, and their white friends stole, and the security guard was so busy following the black boys around, he didn't notice that the white boys were stealing. And is that not a commentary on the state of blackness? And this was in the US, so it's just like the state of blackness university that we're constantly having to prove and affirm ourselves, and sometimes it's unconscious. So you go to the store, you probably didn't want to buy those shoes, you just wanted to ask how much they cost, but the sales assistant was so snooty that you're actually like, can I have the black and blue?
Yes, exactly.
Haji, in the chapter that opens the book is a really interesting chapter. I think I particularly like the line when you say, and the cherry on top of the vanilla cake, is that they also write the soul sensitive stuff, you know. And I suppose for me it brought the we remember this whole big thing that happened last year when Bonang's book was apparently, there was something wrong and Exclusive Books pulled it out. And the conversation that people were having on Twitter was obviously on the social capital that Bonang has. She's like a she's just this brand, why would you do that? But I thought your essay was a really good segue into thinking about like how much room we've afforded white men in literature in the world, right? And I wanted to know, why was it important for you to start the book like that, to start the book with that particular essay?
So I think that essay is a good foundation for the rest of the book, where I actually go ahead and do write what I like, right? But I do think the rest of the book and writing what I like needed to be prefaced by the constraints of an internal publishing and media industry that the outside public is not aware of. Like, not a lot of people who don't work in journalism or who don't work in publishing and media know what the white capitalist economy is like within it, and they don't understand those constraints for women of color. I'm referring to myself here, who work in that, and the barriers we have to cross and the struggles we have to go through in order to have bylines and like our work published, etc. And so I did see having the opportunity to write this book as a huge advantage in order to just like go boss, I just kind of like went wild and not in a way where I was seeking to be, people have this thing where they're like, oh, you wrote this controversial book, and I'm like, no, you must separate this idea of controversy from truth, because the truth is not controversial. The truth is just truth, just because you're looking at it that way because it offends you. And so it was a good starting point for me to go into that and sort of use it as a platform to educate the general public of what the internal workings are, but also as a meditation for myself to not come to peace with that, but to highlight what those things were for me and then use it as a starting point for the rest of the book.
So we often have this conversation about how we feel that people of color, particularly women of color, are not really allowed sort of the range to express themselves fully, right? So you need to speak about serious issues, you need to, or you're not taking into account the seriousness of the black condition in South Africa at the time, right? And there's a piece that you write about in that essay where you talk about how you wrote about your trip to India, and it was just this beautiful, amazing piece, and then you didn't get it published. So looking back, how would you have handled that a little bit differently? Do you think that you would have pushed harder to get it published? Why was it important to include that particular essay? Because you contrasted that beautiful piece that you wrote about India that was layered and it was well thought out and all of this, and then there was a white man who wrote really what could have been a travel guide and got published in numerous spaces.
So like that happens all the time, right? And that continues to happen. So the piece that I wrote in India was after a holiday in India, and so my mom's Indian and her family's from India, and they've never been back, and like, because they came here as indentured laborers, and there's this whole weird history. And like my mom's grandmother, for example, Shame, I always laugh about the story, but it's actually so sad. So she came here on a ship, no? And then she was separated from her family. So some of her family went to Mozambique, and she came to South Africa, and she was like all alone and stuff. But she had no idea, because they just like took her, so she had no idea where she was in the world and where they were in the world. And honestly, it was just next door. And she died not knowing like where her family was and like whatever. And then years and years later, like in the 90s, some nephew of hers came over and was able to find, cousins or like whatever on this side, because obviously she got married and they had kids, and those people had kids. And they were like, where have you been? And they were literally like, we were in Maputo. It was like just
right here.
Short left was it was just there. And like I'm always just like, oh shame, this woman lived like her whole life and her family was next door. And it's terrible and it's so sad, but also like I don't know why I laugh. It's just like it's a comedy of errors basically, right? And I think a lot of the therapy behind it is being able to laugh about these things. Anyway, and so going back was kind of like a pilgrimage almost. It was like this journey of like going back to this home that, you know, generations of our family had left, and they didn't even know where it was on the map, and they didn't know where they were on the map, and you get this opportunity and you go back. And I went back as a citizen because like years later, India invited people who could prove that they had ancestors from India to apply for overseas citizenship. So we were allowed to do that because we could prove that my mother's family was from there. And it was just so nice and so moving, and so I wrote this piece, and everyone was like, oh, like, we want to publish this. And like years later I saw this piece by this like white man, and in the experience of being in the media for so long, I realized that whenever I write something nice, or whenever I have a nice experience, or whenever like I want to write something meaningful or beautiful, like, you know, in a nice, you know, fragrant kind of way, no one is interested. Because nice things are almost reserved for white people. You know, only white people are allowed to write about those things, because if I write about a beautiful holiday or nice hotel room, I always get these questions thrown back at me to be like, oh, so you don't really struggle. Oh, so like, you know, you went to a white school, so like, what's your problem, you know? And it's almost like I need permission from white people to be able to have those things and enjoy those things. And they don't understand it. And it's the same in the media industry. They have no understanding for it. And I think it's bullshit. And so when you ask me this question now about how would I approach it differently now, I think I would have gone into a bigger and more elaborate explanation. I would have been like, okay, fine, you don't want it, but this is your problem. And I would have, yes, I would have
still, but I think in some ways it's still doing the work for the privileged, right? So
absolutely.
I'm really getting tired of us having to explain our humanity, and even when we do have the qualifications to prove that, listen, I wrote this piece, like, it's great.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about the other piece that you wrote about your park experience, and how your colleague had to write a softer, nicer, you know, Haji is... she didn't mean what she said, basically, but she's really nice.
Yes.
But also, like, the understanding that we can't write truth, right? So you were writing true experiences, but it felt like it was attacking people's privilege, and someone else had to coddle them.
Yes, because that's what I mean when, you know, people read our truths and they read the harshness of our truths, and they're confronted with like the pain or whatever, the injustices and stuff, and they almost can't handle it. So then they're like, oh no, this is like too controversial. Like, you're just out to like get us, and you're being controversial and whatever the case is. When in fact it's just honesty. Like, these are facts, you know? And it's almost like easier on their ears when a white person explains it to them. And at the time I didn't realize, like, I just felt unsettled and I felt uncomfortable with the fact that, you know, this white colleague had to write a response to my piece and like explain to her people in a softer way what was happening and make it more palatable for them. And I didn't understand why I was uncomfortable about that. But it came back to this whole notion of white people can speak on behalf of us, but we can't speak on behalf of ourselves.
So speaking of that whole incident, I mean that when your colleague then wrote the response had me, and then I read your essay on performative whiteness, had me then thinking about what it means to be an ally, right? So I guess the question we're always asking ourselves is, how do white people then behave in ways that aren't performative, that aren't destructive to black people, right? So instead of you being given the space to speak on my behalf, how do you behave in ways that allow the space to open for me to speak for myself? So you're not performing your whiteness.
And virtue signaling.
And virtue,
I'm highly allergic to.
And just that like weird savior complex that they
but I think also the conversation that is really important is this, like, separating benevolence from racism. So like I find that a lot of the time white people think that their benevolence excuses them from their racism. So they're like, oh, but I'm just so my black friends.
Yeah.
And when I was and when I was in Soweto for the 2 days, I really experienced it.
It's that whole thing of like some of my best friends are black.
Yeah.
I'm like, no.
Or like I will not allow people to do the work of interrogating my Haji's piece makes them uncomfortable, and instead I'm going to assuage them and then write a response to show that she's actually one of the good ones. She is one of the good ones.
She meant well.
She meant well, okay? Like, but sometimes I can be very emotional. So like it just comes across badly, but she's actually a very nice person.
Yeah, exactly. And I've completely lost my train of thought now because I got so angry. Oh, yeah. I just control anger.
Or maybe not, right?
Yeah.
There's a whole like...
Yeah. So just in terms of like answering your question, it's actually very, very simple. And I think I say this in the book somewhere, and the book was born from the statement in many ways. The way white people can be allies to people of color is just to shut the fuck up.
So, I mean...
Someone in the audience wants
Is
to...
your wife Rebecca ever offended by you, and how do you manage that?
Let's ask her.
Can we take questions at the end? We'll take questions at the end and we'll give Rebecca time to formulate an answer.
From everything you were just saying in the last 2 minutes, all I can think of is that.
She'll get there.
Okay, so I think...
to talk to answer.
I think that actually... So, one of my... I want to say challenges in reading the book was like, okay, I'm like, yes, Haji, yes, drag the white folks. And then I'm like, there's the Bob roll situation. You know, that for me was a little enraging. But then there's a marriage, right? And the marriage is the marriage with this white woman, right? And a lot of people who may read your book may feel that I can't take Haji seriously in her politics because how is she saying white people this and white people that. So I wanted to know, like, so in writing the book and in grappling with these things, because maybe there's another book coming, we don't know. Haji's gonna write.
So. My brother said the next book should be called Sorry, I'm Still Not Sorry.
I wanted to know how you manage to navigate these spaces, right? So like there's a really like firm Haji in the book, right? But there's also this tenderness towards a Rebecca, right? So I want to know how you merge the whiteness of a Rebecca with the Haji, who is, there for the whites.
So I do get that question a lot, and it actually, like, I should have dedicated a chapter to that in the book, but I didn't. And I've since written...
I was like, I'm waiting for this chapter, and then it didn't come. I'm like, no, definitely need to ask.
And then, because I'd received so much interrogation about it, I actually ended up writing a Sunday Times column about it, like later, where I sort of explained all of this. I just want to start off by just issuing a disclaimer. If you are a person of color and you marry a white person, it's trial and error, hey? It's not one size fits all. You're probably going to have to try a few on for size until you find the right one. But that's okay. Happens with other people as well. But to answer your question, I always go back to the same narrative, and that is the narrative of the system that we become victim to when we talk about how marrying outside of our own race erases our blackness or our struggle or the injustices we face, because it doesn't, because that's what so long historically we come from government that suppressed love across the color lines, right? We come from a government that punished people who want to love across the color lines. We come from people who have been tortured and beaten and killed because they attempted to love across the color lines. We come from colorism, where people needed to pass as white to love who they love, and we judge those people, but we need to introspect in what all of that means. And so when you deny a love for like a person who's outside of your race, and you fall into the trap of judging something like that, you're falling into the trap of a system that was built for you. A system of apartheid, basically. But more than that, I always go back to the story of Maya Angelou, who is obviously like greatly respected. And we read her for reference to so many things, and we philosophize on her thoughts and the meaning of her writing. And when you study the life and loves of Maya Angelou, you realize that Maya Angelou had 3 white husbands. And by the time she got around to marrying her 3rd white husband, she had become so vocal and so prolific in the civil rights movement, and she'd become, a face for the movement. She was a famous author already, and her work had been cited in so many different ways. She was best friends with Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and all of that. And she went to I'll never forget, she went to James Baldwin, and she said, yes, James Baldwin, and she went to him and she said, he's asked me to marry him, and I'm not sure what to do, and and he said, and Maya, what's the problem? Why are you afraid? And she said, no, because what will people think? What will people think of me as this powerful black woman who's so vocal about blackness and human rights and injustices? What will they think of me if I marry outside of my race and I marry a white man? And he said to her, Maya, this isn't fear, this is cowardness. You're being a coward. Because in the fight for human rights and in the fight for human justice and in the fight of recognition and equality and all of that, what people of color are saying is not that we love to hate. What people of color are actually saying is that we just love to love. We don't like being angry with you. We don't like being mad at white people. We don't like being contentious and angry and all that stuff. We don't like feeling that way. We actually don't like feeling that way. So if you don't want us to be cross with you, then stop just doing stupid shit. It's as simple as that.
Stop being white.
Yeah. Stop, not even stop being white, but stop the whiteness. And we won't be mad anymore. It's as simple as that.
It's also really interesting that I think that's a question that often gets asked of vocal, woke women of color who then marry outside of their race in ways that don't get questioned of black men or men of color who marry outside of their race, right? It's no one will ever question Fanon's racial credentials, right? But if it's a woman, then the question then begins to be raised about what are your credentials? And it's also the ways in which we police women's autonomy and we police who we believe women should love, right? And it speaks to this idea of the ownership that we think we hold over women that we admire, particularly black women.
But I think also it speaks about a lack of nuance in life, right? So, this interracial thing is still something that I'm going to grapple with. Watch me end up with a white person.
I see
no. But I think also it's thinking about the nuance of but even James Baldwin, right? James Baldwin used to date white men, right? And when we think about Audre Lorde, she was married to a white man and then was with a white woman. And just like white women, right?
Williams.
Yeah, Serena. And it's this idea that I think for me, love has a little complexities that we have to take outside of the politics, right? So sometimes I find that it's challenging for people.
The revolution is coming up.
And sometimes
I
think it's difficult for us to have a straightforward answer about why we do the things we do, because sometimes we don't ask black people who are in black relationships, hey, why are you with a problematic black man?
With the whole time.
Or with nobody is asking them that, but sometimes we police people. But I think for me, the question needs to be raised because people who read the book might be oh wait, can we?
No, definitely, and I think it's completely understandable why the question is raised and why people question it, But I do think, coming back to the point of women being interrogated and made to explain, I do think it is a symptom of a patriarchal society where men's blackness and men's politics, and their thoughts and life and their power sort of just, we assume that it just speaks for itself because we grow up in communities where men don't have to defend certain thoughts and they don't have to defend who they are in many ways, But women and the subtleties of being a woman and the infliction of that on society and what, being a fragile little bird means. You know, it automatically means that women have to explain and they have to be molded to certain, you know, cookie cutter versions of what society thinks they should be. And so in that way, they can be castigated for their choices, and they put out there a lot more to be victimized, a lot more than men. And it's the same with women's take on sexual freedom, for example, or women's takes on sexuality, for example, or women's takes on, you know, crossing the barriers of more conservative norms in terms of like, do I want to have children? Do I not want to have children? What are my choices? Can I choose? You know, and society keeps, you know, just challenging this. And we challenging it now. Society is challenging it now. But before, it was a complete like dictatorship. You know, it was like, we'll tell you what being a woman looks like and feels like, and you just have to abide by those norms. And now things have changed, and we have to stop. And as much as people of color as a whole need to stop explaining ourselves to white people, society must stop expecting women to answer certain questions as well.
Speaking of women, you have an essay about Serena Williams, who is like the greatest of all time ever. And if you don't agree, you can debate your mother. But
yeah, don't at me.
Don't at me, like at your mama, because I'm not responsible for how you feel about black women being excellent. But I found it interesting that there are so many great like sportswomen or great whatever that you could have mentioned. And I mean, we're having a moment with Serena and we're standing in solidarity, because that I deserve an apology is every woman of color ever in their lives. Like every woman of color can relate to deserving an apology and not necessarily always being able to ask for it. So I'm just curious, why did you include Serena? Like, you could have included anybody. It could have been Maya, it could have been anybody. Why Serena? Why did Serena get a whole...
Because I think, like, I don't want to give the chapter away because you have to buy the book, guys, so I can eat. But if you read the book, you'll realize that I grew with Serena, and Serena grew with me. And I think the biggest epitome and the biggest realization of that growth and our closeness in a way, I'm sure I sound like a psycho stalker, but like, my wife is not infused. But our closeness in a way is when this whole thing happened with that umpire, right? And I didn't get out of bed for 3 days because it broke me. Like, it totally broke my heart, because stop laughing at me, y'all. Because, like, you know, you see yourself in someone, and you see yourself grow with someone, and you see them grow with you and the influence they have in your life and the strength and the adversities they have to face, and you take power from that. And to see it all sort of break down in one moment because of pre-existing entitlements and privileges, you just realize how far you've come, but how little you've moved at the same time. And it was a really torturous experience for me, and I actually refused to speak about it for like a long time after that happened, because I was just, as you used to say, I was so shooketh.
Also, I mean, I read that and I thought that it was just like the power of representation, right?
Yeah.
That like for a lot of us, Serena was the first time we were really seeing people who look like us in these previously like white dominated sports. I mean, tennis is, you know, you go and you clap, you don't make too much noise when you're at Wimbledon, you gather yourself, you know, you're not yassing at Wimbledon. And it speaks to that kind of space that you navigate in, and I found that Serena chapter so interesting, because Serena is proof that just like the way that whiteness is set up, no matter how excellent you are as a person of color, the goalposts will keep shifting, right? So now it's great, she's the greatest of all time, but she has an athletic advantage because she's so muscular, and like the goalposts just continuously shift. And I mean, for me, it also speaks to a lot of the themes that she covered in the book, right? About just like the different standards at which people of color and white people are held at, you know? So when you we just don't want to give away too much. You'll read the book and you'll see where we're going with this. But when you talk about like the things that when you're in high school that your white counterparts were allowed to get away with versus you, and the different standards, right? And like when you go horse riding, and you guys get given the horses that just look a little bit tired and they're ready for retirement, right? Because we can all relate to that. Like, if
no,
you...
I can't. I wasn't taking horse riding.
I mean, I also wasn't, but I felt it in my spirits. But it's like the ways in which excellence is not assumed of us, right? So no one will overextend themselves for us, right? So I'm okay with your father's paying for these lessons, but I'm going to give you the old, tired horse. But like when Samantha comes, Samantha must get the prize-winning horse, but we both paid for these lessons, and maybe I'm even better than Samantha. And it's just these hoops that we're always having to
and it's the same in like lots of like societal contexts, like and social contexts as well. So one of the things I speak about is the treatment that people of color get with estate agents. I don't know if you've ever tried to buy an apartment.
This is why we need the land.
But it is hard work, guys.
Yo,
you have to do everything short of pissing in a cup and giving them a blood sample. Honestly, it is such hard work. And I came sort of like face to face with that several times, like over the phone and email. But in practical terms, when I bought my apartment in Sea Point, I went to go see it. And the woman outside did everything in her power to convince me to not buy this place. And I just was like, I have worked hard for my money, and I have the same amount of money as a white person who's going to buy this place. But somehow it's not good enough for you, because you are purely judging me on the color of my skin and how I don't deserve to live here regardless of how much I paid for it. And she literally went out of her way to say things. Oh, she started mildly. She was like, oh, you know, it's like a 4-floor walk-up. I was like, yes. Then she was like, you know, no one like you lives in this building. And I was like, okay. And then she was like, you know, it's a quiet building, so you can't really have like Who's a Thursdays. And then I was like, okay. And then she gave me the price, and she was like, you know, it's so much and so much. Are you sure you can afford it? And I was honestly like, lady, do you want to see my bank statements? Because she was like, do you have someone to sign surety? Because, you know, we won't like just give it to you, and like, and I was standing there and just like, you know, nodding and smiling in a very simple kind of, you know, simple Simon kind of way. And then the next client had arrived, because she was showing 2 people the apartment at the same time. And the next client that arrived was a white woman. And while I was standing there, this woman is like, this is a lovely apartment. You have to buy it. You'll really fit in here. It's gorgeous. It's so good for the price. You get the balcony so big. And we got 2 totally different pictures. And we went up, and she took this woman by her hand and basically gave her like a royal tour of the apartment. And she just left me standing outside. And I happened to love the place, and a colleague showed up, and long story short, her colleague took me to the office to sign an offer, and she walked in and she was like, oh, Haji has just signed an offer. This woman made a U-turn, and she walked out and slammed the door behind her, because she was so offended and so upset by the fact that I had gone to the extent of signing an offer for this place, which she tried so hard to make me not buy. Yes.
Yeah,
I mean, one of my other favorite chapters in the book is about feminism, right? Because I think you really do really important work in this chapter, but also in the chapter you wrote in Feminism Is. Some really important work about, like, you know, cutting people some slack in their feminism. Because I think that we've sort of created this monolithic understanding of what a woke feminist is supposed to look like, without understanding the works, the things that have been built, right? And one of the questions that I had is like, who informs your feminism? So yes, naturally someone will be like Audre Lorde, but your essay alludes to like the women in your family have been the ones who've constructed how you've created a space for yourself in the world.
Look, that was a really hard lesson to learn, because I think my feminist influences come more from my grandfather and my dad initially than they do from my mom. Because my grandfather and dad were both like, you won't play tennis with the girls, you can't play as good as the boys, so you'll play with the boys. Not that the girls weren't good enough, but You know, they were just like, and you can't do any sport you want. There isn't a sport that's isolated to only girls and one that's isolated to only boys. And this extended beyond, like, it went into all spheres. It was like in the arts and music and, you know, and cultural things and whatever. But having said that, within this cultural context, there was a certain role that my mother had to play. And that was one that was completely conservative and sort of unfeminist in a certain way, you know, like doing the dishes and being the housewife and cleaning whatever, like, you know, cooking the food and like all that kind of thing. And she was very observant of like my dad's rules and restrictions and very submissive in that way. And this really, really pissed me off because I couldn't quite make this connection about how they were raising really, really strong, opinionated women, but how my mother was like the complete opposite of this and had to abide by a different set of rules. And I was angry with my mother for like a very, very long time for all of this. Like, it just really pissed me off. Until I got to a point where I realized there isn't a cookie cutter feminism. You know, feminism means different things and it looks like different things to different people. And the women in our lives of previous generations actually had their own kind of feminism. And to a large extent, survival is feminism. In order for women to survive in societies in previous generations, they had to abide by a different set of rules and a different set of norms, because that's how you got by. And that's how you created women who could stand up for themselves. And that's how we exist as we are today. And so there's a certain degree of respect and empathy that I think we lack, because we think we woke up like this, but actually
no one woke up like this.
We didn't. Yeah, we come from somewhere.
I mean, Tlhogonolo alluded to it, but I really enjoyed that essay in Feminism Is. Just because I think we're grappling with this idea that you think your granny wasn't woke because she took your grandfather's surname, right? But it's also about this idea of navigating feminism in ways that are true to ourselves, right? And also just allowing people room to express it. So sometimes a feminist can be someone who takes their partner's surname, right? It's like,
exactly.
And cooks for their partner.
And cooks for their partner, also because it then goes to counter this idea of like white feminist women that unless it's radical and you know, unless you're breaking things down or whatever, then you're not feminist, you know.
Yeah.
And I love that you referred to The Color Purple and Celie, who it's just one of my favorite books. I have to talk about The Color Purple. But when you refer to Celie, I mean, it just also shows a maturity in your feminism, right? Because when I first read The Color Purple, I was like, what the hell is wrong with Celie? Like, I feel really sorry for Celie, but also Celie could just leave him, right? Except that she can't. And what happens when she can't? And what does feminist empathy look like for women whose life choices are different to yours? And I think that those are some of the really powerful questions that you asked in that essay. What does feminist empathy look like in solidarity when it's for women whose life choices are so radically different to yours? And can you reach outside of yourself to empathize with those women? Because if you can't, then is your feminism intersectional? Then is it woke? Is it?
Yeah, I think you know, the reason why like arts and creativity and like fiction, even in film and in writing exists, is because when we can't access things theoretically and academically, they exist to challenge us in different ways that are maybe more palatable. And I think why I use The Color Purple in the chapter about feminism in the book is because for me it was such an awakening and such a perfect metaphor for what intersectionalism truly looks like and what the realization of that should be. And it just kind of dawns on you through these characters that intersectionalism is about recognition, but it's also about growth. So if you haven't read or watched The Color Purple, I highly recommend that you do. And look at Celie with different eyes.
I mean, you've already alluded to some of the people I would like to believe you read. So you've referred to Alice Walker, James Arthur Baldwin. So is there a book that changed your life? Like, you read this book and you're like, I feel seen. Oh my gosh, like, why didn't I read this earlier? Or like you constantly return to?
I always return to The God of Small Things.
I see. And you got to be in conversation with her. How is that?
Oh, she's so lovely, guys. She's so beautiful. Like, I think, so we had dinner with her the night before to be on a panel with her. And honestly, it was like my life came full circle. Because I bought the color purple when I bought a lot of small things from a secondhand store when I was like extremely young. And I read it almost every year. And then to have dinner with her and be on a panel with her was just like, if there is a God, he was just like, you deserve this. Like, let's make this, let's make this happen. And when I had dinner with her, I just probably was like an idiot because I couldn't stop staring at it. It's just so beautiful. It's just like embodies everything that's like beauty, like from her mind to how she looks, except for my wife, of course, who's staring at me.
It's an important caveat.
Yeah. She's just like this light, and I just felt that it God, I don't even know how to explain it, but I think I always return to that book because you can apply the challenges of any taboo that she approaches in that book to almost anything in life, and it's always going to be topical in that way. And more than that, it's just beautiful writing.
Yes.
Like, yeah.
So we are going to take a few questions from the audience who I'm sure is burning. You had a question that we said we were going to answer at the end. Rebecca, do you want to answer her question? Do you want to repeat your question, please?
Do you ever take, well, I was asking through Haji, so does Rebecca ever take offense to you, and how do you manage that in your relationship? So I understand that it's, you're against the structural inequality and structural patriarchy and so on, but you use the word white often, and you come across as anti-white. So how does that cause any conflict between the two of you? How do you manage
that? No, if I'm honest, it actually doesn't. Like, I'd be lying if I mention an example where it has caused conflict between us. Because I think in her whiteness, Rebecca is one of the few people who is quite evolved. And that's not to say that she doesn't act overly white for my liking sometimes, because, that does occur. But the conversations happen within our household where I do challenge her on those things and point out what certain things mean and how they come across and how they need to be treated with sensitivity and a little degree of introspection, and often maybe just silence. And so those conversations do happen, but they are very healthy when they happen, and it is possible. There is hope, guys.
Also, I mean, just maybe this comment, but I don't necessarily think that Haji is anti-white. I think that you can be anti-whiteness as an institution and as a structural inequality that exists, that continues to hold people of color back and that continues to behave in ways that are violent towards people of color without being anti-white. And I think that's an important thing for white people to understand as well, that I can have a problem with your whiteness and how that manifests in relation to me, but not be anti-white, because then, I mean, are you anti-black?
Yes.
I don't know, for me I think it's a little challenging. I mean, even it seems like weird to say anti-white, because we live in a white supremacist world, right? So everything that we live in is congregated within whiteness, right? So when you speak against racism and against, like Sis said, patriarchy, you're speaking against a system of white supremacy, right? So you can be anti-white supremacy, but I don't think necessarily anti-whiteness, because you exist within whiteness. Whiteness is normalized in the world, actually. Is there any other questions?
Yes, you have a... He came all the way from Pretoria.
Oh, wow, that is a long way. All the way. Did you need a visa?
I probably do. I really enjoyed your book, especially the chapter about your dad. That was, I think, as a brown Muslim gay man that like meant. I was literally in class and I was literally in tears. It was really amazing. So thank you for that. I think my question is with regards to what you spoke about the issues that brown writers face within the publishing industry. What do you think? What is the way forward, more likely, and how we can overcome the obstacles that we currently face within the industry?
I think the first thing you can do is just to understand how the system works. Like with anything, you can't challenge anything until you know how it works. The second thing is the white
We
people's
apologize. We apologize for the
left
break in
to
transmission.
So I think that's extremely important because I think often and you find this a lot these days, like they people like woke Twitter and like people are very woke, but I just feel like no one reads things, you know, like you want to replace science in school because fees must fall, but then you don't know what you're going to replace it with. You know, I'm like, it's fine, you know, it's a Western subject, but then come with receipts, like replace it with something, you know. And it's the same in the media industry. Like you have to know how something works in order to know how you're going to replace it and how you're going to challenge it and how you're going to face it. In more simple terms, I do feel like writers of color need to stop obeying the man in a sense, because we often accept less than we deserve because we're so desperate to fit in to a certain structure. And I think we really do need to stop doing that. Stop doing work for free. Like it's not worth it, and always you have to push back. And I feel quite privileged saying that because I think I'm in a position right now where I obviously can do that, and I do that, and I often go, oh, okay, you don't like it, fuck off, like leave it, it's okay, you know, I'll go somewhere else, and I know that someone else will take me, and that's, you know, that's a point of privilege. But I do think systemic change needs to happen, and it happens when we stop with this Uncle tomfoolery, because there's a lot of that going on, and in as much as white people need to speak and preach to other white people, we need to start challenging our own people as well, and going, you know what, stop licking the chocolate starfish of your white publishers, because it's just not.
That's a quotable.
just
That
not
is
happening.
that is a quotable. Stop licking
Yeah.
the chocolate starfish. Listen, I'm gonna use that.
There was one more question?
Yeah.
Oh.
Since we're on the topic, sorry Rebecca, I'm reading out again. Is Rebecca South African or is she from abroad? Because I find generally white people from abroad that I've come into contact with are far more tolerant and work than South Africans that are white. And then, I had another question, now it's just flown away. Anyway, if you can answer that.
So Beck was born in Malawi. But then she's also one of the fortunate whites who has a European passport. So she has like an Irish passport as well. But she's not from Ireland, like she wasn't born there. But I don't think like that's an excuse. Like I feel like, you know, we shouldn't absolve people because of where they're born and what their passport says. If you have a South African passport and you're a South African citizen, I'm sorry, I'm not going to absolve you of your racism because you don't come from a European country. You have full agency. You exist in a world where like fucking Google is your friend. So,
And it's free.
you know, adapt or die. Not that I'm going to kill anyone, but adapt or die.
Sorry, the other question I just remembered was you were saying, it sounded a little bit maybe one-sided when you were saying you're having these conversations in your home. Is there anything that Rebecca challenges you on there? Because I think it's also important for us to not generalize the whole white population. I mean, I have a lot of white friends that are very woke, as you say. So are those conversations more, this is actually such a personal question, I don't know if you even want to answer it, her defending herself of something that you are seeing, or does she sometimes challenge you too on a certain opinion you have?
Yeah, she does challenge me because she never keeps the place clean, and it's very hard for me to keep on tidying. No, I can honestly say no, because I think even if you have, and I'm sure maybe your experience is different, But I can say that I have woke white friends, but it doesn't absolve them of their whiteness. I think the most irritating thing that woke white friends can do is virtue signal. And I'm so allergic to it. Honestly, just thinking of it gives me hives. And I think, I don't think this makes my wife a weak person to say that she doesn't challenge me or try to defend her whiteness. I actually think it makes her a strong person. And more white people need to do that.
Yes.
Judging from the title, are you the antagonist or the protagonist?
In terms of...
You say sorry, not sorry. It's kind of confusing.
Oh, I get you. Okay. So it's a contradiction in terms, right? Because it's it's a weird title, I guess, because the whole book is about not being sorry. But it's purposefully a contradiction because it is also a book about how I've spent a lot of my time being sorry.
Being outside love.
Yes. So yeah.
So mine is more of like a comment than a question. It's also about the title. It's like the whole sorry, not sorry thing. My friend and I are university students, and we engage in these conversations a lot where we feel as if like our feminism and our blackness is always being questioned and being challenged by these men around us. And it's always been a battle, especially recently, of how when you speak of your opinion and you speak of like your feminism and all that, you come off as aggressive, and then you have to explain yourself again, like continuously having to explain yourself. And either way, you come off exhausted, like you come out of these conversations exhausted because you're like, should I have explained myself? Like what I said was valid. So I really like that the title of your book is Sorry Not Sorry, because we've been growing into becoming not sorry, like not sorry for what we are. Not having to explain our feelings. It's valid.
Yeah, and I think also like we need to, in as much as the stereotype of the angry black woman exists, we also, I don't want to say we need to appropriate that because that's like fucked up, but I think we need to kind of just be so what about it. Do you know what I mean? Yes, I am an angry black woman, so take it or leave it. Yeah.
I mean, Audre Lorde has a beautiful essay on women and anger, right? And speaking about like, of course I'm angry, like racism is rife and it's affecting me. So I think like in some ways like, sure, why not be angry? Like, why can't I be angry?
Like Zora Neale Hurston, if you keep quiet about your pain, they'll kill you and say that you enjoyed it.
Yeah, exactly.
You had a...
Yes.
That's a lot.
So I'm just thinking about the question around race and relationships. And my co-host on my podcast, Tiffany, asked, Haji about this as well. And so we went through it together and decided on the questions. And I think part of the reason we asked it is because a lot of the time when we have white friends, white lovers, or even feminists, because feminists are poor lesbian apparently who date men, we excuse certain aggressions, microaggressions, macroaggressions. And so for me, it's not a question of whiteness rubbing off on blackness, but more a question of blackness then rubbing off on whiteness, because they will say, my wife is work, my friends are work, and so, maybe it's not that bad. And I think it's a struggle between, like you're saying, white people and whiteness, and sometimes we kind of get those wires crossed. And so when I ask it, when I think about it, I think it's more of a wanting us to talk about certain things and grapple with nuance and the lives that we live, and talk about it, and not necessarily have answers, perhaps more questions, because you said you have to love the questions themselves. I think it was good. But it's more a question of then still holding the people that we love accountable. And so I'm interested more in that conversation than in should we be loving whoever, because you love who you love, but it's, are we holding those people accountable, and how are we doing so? And not excusing certain things because we love them.
I agree with that. That's a very good point.
So sorry, we're gonna wrap up. We're gonna wrap up. But you can ask a question afterwards. She'll still be here.
Obviously, we know Haji listens to the Cheeky Natives, and obviously, this is the big reveal.
Dun, 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 dun.
So other people give people like popcorn or whatever they give them, but we're serious. Like we've been dispossessed, so we're giving people land.
Based on how much we've enjoyed your book. So we read your book and we go meh, or we go, oh my god, this is like life changing. And based on that, the Cheeky Natives Land Committee, which consists of myself and the Tlokonolo, sits and we deliberate. And then we allocate land, right? So we have a little Berlin conference of our own. And we decided on the land that we were going to give you. So are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. I'm very excited.
Are you ready for the land that you're getting? So having read your book, and
I hope it's not in a Zadhol or something.
we're coming for all the land. And you were born to a Muslim family in the apartheid township of Lodium in Pretoria. We thought it would be appropriate to give you a piece of land in Pretoria. But the piece of land that we're giving you, are you ready?
Yes.
We are giving you Waterkloof.
Oh my god!
Lovely. We are giving you Waterkloof in Pretoria, and you are going to go on to flourish and be all the brown girl magic that we know
I'll
you
take
to
it,
be.
guys. The views, the weather, everything.
Listen, you can also land your plane at the airport base. I'm here for it.
I'll have it.
But just from the Cheeky Natives, we just want to say congratulations on having written such a powerful book. I think that this is the year of the memoir, and women of color are really, really coming through with the memoir and telling their stories in ways that are true, that aren't written for a specific gaze, but that lend truth to power, right? That tell truth to power and do so in ways that empower the people who are reading your stories. Because there's nothing more powerful than feeling that you are the only person in the world experiencing this, and then you read. And that's what James Baldwin said, that you think your pain is unprecedented in the world, and then you read. And you realize that you're not the only person who thinks Serena is the greatest of all time.
But yes, Haji, I think from the Cheeky Natives, really thank you for also the vulnerability with which you wrote your book and the honesty with which you wrote it. I think that some of the for me, I think what the book has done is to start creating conversations and necessary conversations about race, about love, about family, about mental health, about queerness and religion, and these various intersections that we find ourselves in. So thank you for that, for just being that honest and vulnerable with these essays. And we obviously cannot read whatever you write next, and to sit down and be like, you know what, Haji, give us again, give us again the vanilla on the cherry on top of the vanilla cake. Having said that, is there anything that you're working on now, or you just like, you know what, I'm still not taking a break?
I'm not really taking a break, so I still freelance, but I must say I've been quite lax on that. Don't know how I'm going to pay my bills next month. But no, not. I'm thinking about obviously another book, because I would love to do one, but I'm still ironing out exactly what that is.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for a great audience. We will, have this opportunity for book signings, book purchases, because y'all
please buy
deserve
the
to buy
books,
books.
y'all. Don't ask the author for a PDF. I say this all the time, because this foolery must stop. Can people do better? Please don't ask the author for a free copy. Books cost money to print. I don't know if somebody's told you this, but I'm gonna break it to you today. Books actually cost money to print. You can't get them free. Buy a book. Please don't ask the author for a PDF. Maybe don't lend your friend's copy. Go and buy a book, just as a suggestion. Maybe
support black women,
support women of color telling their stories, right?
Totally agree with that.
Thank you. Yeah, I've already got someone who's gonna buy the book in the audience. But you can use our code Cheeky at Bridge Books, and you can get 10% off. So we are here to help you be better people. That's what we do.